Well, the all-share index has been trading in negative territory for the whole session today, with industrials and financials taking the main beating. European stocks, meanwhile, are looking mixed. On the commodity front, Brent crude oil is fast heading towards $79 a barrel, and with rumbles in the Middle East expected to keep the oil price elevated. The local currency has lost about 0.8% against the US dollar after making positive gains in previous sessions. And data news that could well have moved to the local market. The first quarter of unemployment figures came out unchanged at 26.7%. Let's take a look at the indicators. Well, we cross live to the Johannesburg Stock Exchange now, where my guest, Viv Govinda of Rand Swiss, is standing by. Thanks for joining us, Viv. Global markets are looking rather mixed today, but that focus is now beginning to shift back to those US-China trade talks.
Yes, the US and China have been having a couple preliminary discussions about, the issues between the two countries. At the moment, or the kind of the rhetoric that's coming out of both sides seems to be that they're pretty far apart in terms of coming to an agreement. And despite the fact, like you mentioned, that the ZTE, tweet from Donald Trump, which helped, maybe, calm waters a little bit. But remember, the ZTE situation doesn't have anything directly to do with the trade talks. It's more about security regarding, it was regarding possible hacking and possible, malfeasance by Chinese manufacturers with regards to some of the electronics they provide. But that being said, I do think that the trend historically has been that Donald Trump goes off and does something extreme and then kind of, calms waters down and brings it back. I mean, it goes from Rocket Man down to the head of Korea being a good gentleman and treating the prisoners he kidnapped effectively quite excellently. So he's it's a trend he's done before, and if something follows here, we do see the extreme rhetoric calming down quite dramatically as the deal approaches. Hopefully that might turn markets around.
On the all-share index, we do see that was down by as much as 1%, with industrials and financials in particular not doing very well. What's your analysis on that?
Yeah, look, the unfortunate thing is that we as emerging market always suffer whenever there's uncertainty in the world, and with the stuff happening in the Middle East as well as the stuff with regards to China and trade war discussions, I do think that most international investors and even some local investors say if you're in a market like South Africa, which is a bit smaller but more volatile, maybe take a bit off the table, and that's why we're seeing things that are being more affected than other sectors, for instance financials, which is heavily dependent on stability and confidence, taking some of the harder knocks in the market.
Now, with things brewing in the Gaza Strip, over and above Mr. Trump's withdrawal from the Iran deal, can we see Brent crude oil breaching $80 a barrel?
I'm not so sure if the stuff happening in the Gaza Strip would be sufficient. I mean, look, the Saudis, who were basically the kind of like the buffer in the system, historically have been quite vociferous on the side of the Palestinians. However, ever since the latest change in power there, with MBS effectively taking power, we have seen a much more conciliatory attitude towards Israel from the Saudis, and effectively, I've seen a statement. I'm not so sure if it's actually something he said, but it seems to be that they are pushing the Palestinians to take any deal that they can get from the Israelis, as opposed to saying, okay, hold your line firm. If that's the situation, if the Saudis are saying that, or believing that they can, kind of sideline the Palestinian issue in order to show up support against Iran, which is the true enemy of Saudi Arabia. It's not Israel so much as Iran that Saudi views as being his main enemy. Then we might not see the kind of reaction with the oil prices over the longer term, as you might have seen in the past when we had things like, for instance, the kind of like embargoes that were put on by OPEC to order to drive prices dramatically higher, a couple of decades ago.
And then here at home, of course, we've had that labour unemployment number come out. It's unchanged for the first quarter of this year at 26.7%. What does this figure mean to you? What do you read into this figure? And does the local market really look at this number in the same way as markets look at the US job number, for example?
Oh, we don't have anywhere near the sensitivity to the local, jobs number as we do to the U.S. jobs number. I mean, it's far more important to look at what non-farm payrolls does as opposed to what happens with regards to our own employment rate. That being said, the employment number that came out, even though it is unchanged, we had expected a slight deterioration. I think a couple of the estimates out there were looking for about 0.2% higher than they currently got. But the interesting point is that the official number unchanged, but the unofficial number was a little bit worse. The unofficial number looks at, basically people that would take a job if offered, whereas the official number just looks at people that are actively looking for employment. In a country like South Africa, where certain segments of the population are looking at 50+% unemployment rates, it requires an incredible effort of will to be consistently looking for a job when more than half the people in your particular cohort are unemployed. So it is I think a much better number to look at is the expanded number, and that has actually gone up a little. So that's obviously showing that there's not as much, positivity coming to the economy as we would be hoping. We need to see growth rates in South Africa in excess of 4 or 5% to make a real dent on these numbers. And once we get a bit of tightness with regards to unemployment, hopefully down to like below 10% eventually one day, then it might play a bigger part with regards to things like, for instance, interest rates, etc.
We look forward to that day. Thanks very much, Viv, for your time. As always, that was Viv Govender. He's from Rand Swiss.